Hello and welcome to Google Analytics 4 or GA4 101. There's been a lot of talk about Google Analytics 4, especially since Google has announced sunset dates for UA360, and with good reason. The countdown is on when it comes to transition. A lot of people have questions, and so this presentation is a basic to intermediate, just to look at some of the background, answer some of those questions, look at some of the differences of Google Analytics 4. So on that, here is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to start with a little bit of the background, then we're going to take a peek at events and parameters, look at some of the new metrics, some of the insights that you can have with GA4, and then my favorite, some of the cool things that you can do with GA4 that we have not been able to do with Google Analytics. First, let's talk about how we got here. Google Analytics was built off of a web analytics product called Urchin, which was built around 1996. A time I think we can all agree when people interacted with the internet very differently than they do today. And I found this fact that I think really brings this home. In 1996, Americans with internet access spent less than 30 minutes a month online. So you can imagine, we were doing things a little bit differently than we do today when we're pretty much constantly online. And the web at that time was very static. So everything was about web pages, page loading, page views, and sessions. Then Google Analytics and us as users began to evolve over time. So with Google, more functionality was built into GA, and GA purchased other products which were added to it. And this was happening at the same time that Web 2.0 was happening. And Google really did its best to make sure that Google Analytics kept up. So during the same time, Adtech and martech exploded. It used to be people only did a handful of things as far as digital advertising was concerned. This grew with paid search, but as Adtech and martech technologies became more robust and greater in number, there became more and more things to track and to pay attention to. Attribution, for example. This had been around a long time, but now as people are exposed to more and different touch points, you really need to be able to understand the customer journey as well as the full purchase path. So you could say we reached a tipping point where all of this converged, and then add in the deprecation of the third-party cookie being imminent. The technology GA was built upon could no longer support the realities of the current day. So Google took their Firebase product, which was used to track apps, and married it with the best of Google Analytics, and about 18 months ago created what was called App Plus Web. And then App Plus Web in about October 2020 became GA4, the next generation version of web analytics. And it was built specifically for the way people interact with apps and websites today. With GA4 comes a whole new way to rethink what you thought about analytics. One point of distinction is that the data model is completely different. And because of this, I can't stress this enough, you're going to hear me say it time and time again, you have to put basic GA4 tags on your site. There's only two. We'll look into what those are a little bit later. But until you do that, no data will be collected in GA4, which means you will have no data for your Google Analytics support, reports. So you really need to get these tags on as soon as possible. Now, some of you may be asking, why do I need GA4? And there are a couple of reasons. One I just touched on, and it's the first and the biggest, is that Google has announced sunset dates for UA360. UA will sunset July 1, 2023, and GA360 on Oct 1, 2023. As of these dates, hits will no longer be counted, which means no new data will be collected. I'll say that again. No hits will be counted and no new data will be collected. So as of July 2nd and October 2nd, it doesn't matter how many people come to your website or to your app, you won't know about it. It won't be tracked unless you've already got your tags on. All the data that you do have, which is in GA or GA360, will become read-only. And then 6 months later, that data is going to go away entirely. So if that's not a good enough reason, the second reason is that without GA4, you will have a much harder time dealing with the demise of the third-party cookie. So now that we've covered background and history, let's jump into a couple of the fundamental differences between GA360 and GA4. Again, GA4 was built for the way people today interact with websites and apps. Where GA was built on the page view model, GA4 uses a flexible event-based data model. Basically, GUA was very much focused on page views, sessions, and it has limited cross-device or cross-platform reporting, and even more limited automation. GA4, on the other hand, identifies users in a totally different way, and it has a lot of machine learning, artificial intelligence, and modeling built into its core. One of the key differences is how GA4 is able to understand users and visitors. In traditional GA, if someone came to your site from a URL that had a UTM parameter on it, this was a campaign click, and it would start a new session. If you have a lot of campaigns running and people click on more than one campaign while in a session, this would be counted as another new session. This, of course, would result in a higher number of sessions. But in GA4, because you can still track all of these campaigns and traffic from campaigns and identify that the user is the same, it understands the session better. Basically, GA4 understands that apps might exist in the background, or you may have different tabs open, or you may put something in your cart in one tab and then get sidetracked, and hours later you complete the purchase, maybe even in a completely different tab or on a completely different device. GUA would end up showing multiple sessions and wouldn't be able to tell you things like which was the initial thing you did to get the purchase. But GA4 can not only tell you what that original event was, it can actually credit the revenue up to 72 hours later. So this makes your reporting incredibly more accurate. However, one thing to note is that you would not want to compare real time to real time because the revenue might actually be credited differently. Another great thing about GA4 is how it is able to understand users. GUA likes to identify a visitor with a client ID and user IDs, but GA4 leverages the Google Signals database. This is a database that is comprised of about 2 billion anonymous users with anonymous IDs that can associate a person to different devices, different browsers, etc. So here's an example. So one day I'm accessing Gmail from my phone, and then the next day I'm checking it on my laptop, or from a different browser, or from my tablet. In the Signals database, Google has different columns for all of my different IP addresses, different device IPs, etc. But they're all associated with me. So it knows that I am the same person, regardless of what device I'm on or what browser I'm looking at. It's almost mind-boggling how accurate this database is. And this is really important because if we are going to live in a world where there aren't cookies, the ability to understand a new versus repeat user won't necessarily go away. It will just manifest itself in different ways. So now let's just take a look at events and parameters. As I said earlier, the way that traditional analytics worked was based on the fact that a page would load, which was a very static mindset. If you wanted to see things that were not just based on a web page loading, you actually had to tag, like events. But GA4 is built on the idea that everything is events-based. It's all interactions with your website or app. And these interactions may have attributes like parameters that are associated to them. And there are different types of events. For example, automatically collected events like session start, page view, first visit to the site, things that are automatically collected. So even if you just put 2 tags on your site, again with me and these 2 tags, You'll get data in the reports based on automatically collected events. Next, we have what are called enhanced measurement events, things that you would have had to tag before, like page scrolls or file downloads or video views. Next are recommended events, which you set up, but now Google has predefined names and parameters for. And of course, there are custom events, but the old school hierarchy of event category, action, and label goes away. And now you have normal event names where you can even add parameters. And there are default user properties for things like demographics. Before in Google Analytics, these were limited, but in GA4, they are much more robust, again, because of the integration with Google Signals. Of course, you can still tag to capture information about your user, but with all of the current and future privacy regulations, you're going to have to be really, really careful with your tags. Another great thing about GA4 is that the old structure of category action label goes away. Before, you would run a customer report that had the event category action label, and there would be 50,000, 100,000 rows because of all of the different combinations of the different category action and labels. So this was really confusing. Don't get me wrong, people were able to make events work in the old GA, but they really had to pigeonhole them into this weird hierarchy that should never have existed. The ability to have flexibility and to just think of events as normal things that happen in your app or on your website is huge. And it's much more logical. Of course, you can port over all of your existing complicated hierarchies, but this is something really important. Transitioning to GA4 is a really great time to rethink about the way that you are thinking about events, because doing this will result in reports that are a lot easier to understand. There are a lot of new metrics in Google Analytics 4. So let's take a look at some of them. For a lot of people, the new metrics in GA4 are kind of a bitter pill to swallow, because rather than having the concept of sessions, the only concept was engaged session. So what this is basically someone can come to your site, stay for 10 seconds or more, or goes to more than 2 pages, or performed a conversion. So a conversion is like a goal in traditional GA. But as people started using GA4, Google received a lot of feedback that there needed to be more of a like for like from UA360 to GA4. So there is also the concept of sessions and new sessions, along with engaged sessions, which is important when trying to get an understanding of campaign performance. Before, we could create a segment for non-bounce to try and get this type of engaged session information. So it's great to have a metric for this available right out of the box in GA4. And even better, it's configurable. So you can decide your definition of an engaged session. Maybe instead of 10 seconds, it makes more sense for your site that this is 30 seconds or 40 seconds. You can make these changes, and then GA4 makes the calculations, such as engaged session per user, average engagement time, etc. Then by leveraging signals and really understanding the visitor as they come back over and over, gives you a really accurate lifetime value. And this is something that is pretty unique to web analytics. Having a lifetime value you can really, truly believe is just another one of those great things about Google Analytics 4. With GA4, you could really customize your implementation with different types of events, etc. But you can also streamline the initial implementation to start collecting data right away. This is what I've been talking about throughout, these 2 tags, just by setting up the configuration tag and the event tag. And we recommend doing this as soon as possible. Then you can complete your transition, make all of your customizations afterward. But as soon as you put these tags up, you are starting to collect data in GA4. And setting them up is very simple with the Google Tag Manager. Let's take a look at some of the insights that GA4 makes available. GA4 was originally being launched when the deprecation of the third-party cookie was already imminent. So Google placed a lot of focus on machine learning and artificial intelligence to replace the insights that third-party cookies provided. There are a lot of predictive capabilities in GA4, including the ability to build predictive audiences, which, if you think about, is another huge deal. You can use these predictive capabilities to see things like who is the most likely to buy and who is the most likely to churn. And this allows you to make quick decisions like spending more money on paid search to get the people that you know have a high probability to churn back to your site. Now as I said, this is my favorite part. There are some amazing things you can do in GA4. Let's look at a couple of them. In the old GA, there was a lot of focus on bounce rate. This is where people who come to your site see only one page and leave immediately. Your first reaction to this might be, this is great. People came to my site, found exactly what they wanted in a fast amount of time, and they left. But of course, the majority saw the bounce rate as a bad thing. If you focus on the concept of engaged sessions by default visitors who were on your site for 10 seconds or longer, or saw 2 views and completed 1 conversion, again, goal in GA Universal, not only is this better than a non-bounce metric, but it also may filter out bots that are not already filtered out. And you can actually see the engagement level by the different channels and even drill down all the way to campaigns. So traditional GA was great for asking the who, what, where, when questions. So think who is the audience? What is what they did on the site? Where did they come from? And when did they come? But it was not great about answering the why. But the reality is that some people, they want to see reports that they're used to looking at. For example, the landing page report in the behavior section, which is not a default report in Google Analytics 4. But you can recreate this report and add it to your navigation. So to create the landing page report that you are used to looking at, or really any other report that you are used to looking at, just go to the engagement page title screen name report and have the dimensions by page title and screen name. Then you can select the events to be the session start, then sort by descending and save that report as the landing page report. Why this is important is that, so even though the report might not exist in the UI out of the box, you can 100% create reports that show the information that you are used to seeing. And I think this might help people transition a little, make that transition a little easier to take. But this report, which is available in GA4, is the segment overlap report. This is a very cool report because GA4 makes it really easy to build a segment of different conditions. And this report allows you to drag up to 3 segments into the report palette so you can actually see where they overlap. Then, just by right-clicking, you can create a segment of the intersection that you can then push out as an audience into your Google Ads, or if you're using Google Marketing Platform, Campaign Manager, or Search Ads, you can just push that in automatically. One of the best things about GA4 is the whole concept of the funnel. So generally, funnels are big upside-down triangles where people come in maybe at your website or at a product page, and then they follow this very predefined path until the conversion. And there's a significant drop-off between the beginning of the funnel and the end of the funnel. But if you think about it, that's not how people actually interact with websites or apps at all, really. So in GA4, there's this concept of the open funnel, and it's very, very useful. So in GA4, you can mark the funnel as open. You can also mark it as closed, but you can mark it as open, which means it doesn't force progression from one step to the next. So in this example that you're seeing on the screen, in step 2, the count of visitors above that white line are people who started at that step. Maybe it was bookmarked, maybe session length started a new session. Whatever it was, they actually entered the funnel in step 2. So really, your funnels don't even have to look like funnels anymore. And you can also make custom funnels. And you don't have to just think about your conversion funnels. You can also have micro conversion funnels, or even just ways you hope people navigate through your content. Another thing that's very cool is you can also see, just by right-clicking on one of the stages of the funnel, you can see the next action. So if someone fell out of the funnel, you want to know where they went or what they did. Now you can see that. And this is also great input for modifying the content and calls to action of each step of your funnel to encourage visitors not to leave. You can also choose to see the elapsed time between steps. Again, this can be handy for understanding timing of remarketing messaging. And there's even more cool things. GA4 also supports all of the different attribution models you are used to seeing, like model comparison, when you want to compare last non-direct click to first click or linear. Any of these static algorithm-based attribution models are supported in GA4, but it also supports the data-driven attribution model. Instead of super smart people creating these models, there is also machine learning that needs to be considered when it comes to attribution, because this is how it continually gets smarter and smarter as it takes into consideration not just the marketing touch points that resulted in conversions, but also things like sessions that didn't convert or things that were abandoned, and really all of the different things that impact the conversion process. And this data-driven option is built right out of the box in GA4 in the advertising attribution section model comparison report. You can add a secondary dimension to the model comparison tool. If you actually want to go ahead and switch the model to a data-driven attribution, you can just log in if you're an admin and select it. This data-driven way is definitely the way to start thinking about attribution. The idea of changing the attribution model may freak some people out if all of a sudden credit to different campaigns and channels shift, but you just have to remember there's always the model comparison report. So you can always compare the data-driven to the last click, non-direct click, if you wanted to kind of compare what things look like historically to what they look like in a data-driven world. Another thing you can do as browsers continue to aggressively deprecate cookies. So obviously your campaigns and your channels aren't going to stop working when the cookies go away. Just want to make that very clear. But what might happen is that the credit is shifted to a different campaign or a different channel, or more credit is shifted to direct. In the model comparison, you can compare two different attribution models and then add a secondary dimension. So with this, you can actually see for yourself the impact of cookie deprecation on different browsers. This is a good report if people are questioning performance, because the numbers are sort of shifting as far as where the credit is being allocated for different campaigns or different channels. You can actually show them and not have to go down the whole path of explaining cookie deprecation. Conversion paths can be found in the advertising attribution section conversion paths report. In this report, you can actually see the number of touch points that it takes to result in a conversion, as well as the time to conversion. Again, this is a default channel in GA4, but you can actually drill down to a campaign level in the template gallery. I really recommend that when you log into GA4 that you do some looking around. For example, to find what I'm showing you here on this screen, you would go into Explore, and then there's a blue box that says Template Gallery. This is a great place to start looking around. The User Explorer report is a little bit more complex, but it allows you to see data at a user level. Yes, this is a report in Google Analytics, but in GA4, you can really customize it and add segments and different metrics and dimensions. Here you can really get to the specific audience lists that, again, you can push into Google Ads, Campaign Manager, and all of that. With so much user info, you can now do things like, for example, say you were running a promotion on a specific day, and you want to create an audience for people who visited on that day but didn't convert. You can now do exactly that and other things like that with these Explore reports. Another cool thing is that a lot of the time, analysts are asked one-off or ad hoc questions. And before, you would have to run a report or create a segment or do something like that to get the answer. Now there's a search bar where you can just type the question. So for example, how many conversions were there yesterday? And the answer will pop up and be added to your clipboard. So now you can just ask Google Analytics a question, copy and paste the answer into an email, and send it to the person who asked. That's it. You can get answers to people so much faster. So we covered some of these things in this video, but there are lots that we didn't even touch on. So we will cover them in future topics like BigQuery, which is a great way to get your data out of analytics. Remember, when GA sunsets, your data becomes read only, and in 6 months after that, it's going to disappear completely. So to keep that data, you are going to have to export it, and Google BigQuery is a great option for this. There's an integration, and even better, it is free. Users may establish links between Google Analytics for properties and display and video 360 advertisers. So linking to display and video 360 supports the following features. Users will see attributed display and video 360 traffic appear in their GA4 cross-channel reporting. Eligible GA4 audiences will be exported to display and video 360 for use in campaign targeting. And GA4 conversions will be exported to display and video 360 for use in display and video 360 custom bidding algorithms. It's a lot of saying the same thing. Again, I really can't say this enough. We recommend getting GA4 up and running as soon as possible and having it just sit side by side next to GA or GA360. By doing this, you'll be collecting data, but you'll also be giving yourself time to get comfortable with the new features and the new interface of GA4. So if your goal, and I think your goal should be to have your dual tagging set up by October 1st, 2022, this is going to give you an entire year of data alongside your GA or UA, GA360 or UA data. And that's going to be huge. You do not want to come to October 1st and you have, a week or zero amount of data in your GA4. So we really suggest doing this as soon as you possibly can. If you have questions about anything we've covered or things we haven't covered but you would like to know more about, or even the transition process, please send us an email or reach us on LinkedIn and we'll get answers to you right away. If you have accessed this recording through GoToWebinar, you're going to be redirected to a feedback form where you can add your questions and they will be sent directly to us. You can also do a self-assessment on where you are when it comes to GA4 and what your next step should be. Thank you very much.